In this video, we'll cover the local history feature of VM Maestro, the user interface for VIRL, Cisco's Virtual Internet Routing Lab. Now, before we start talking about local history, I just want to remind everyone that VM Maestro lets you undo your recent changes, just like you'd expect. So for example here, if we change all the nodes from iOS-V to CSR1000V, we can undo the change by going to the Edit menu and selecting Undo. Nodes will be changed back to iOS-V. You can also use the keyboard to undo changes. So if I delete this connection, I can press Ctrl Z or the Command Z on Mac and undo that change. As is usual with undo, you can only undo changes that you make while you have the file open. So for example here, if I make a change, deleting a couple nodes in the topology, and then I close the editor, saving the file before I close, I can no longer undo that change. So even if I open up the file again, and we see that I have just the one remaining node, I can't really undo the change that I made before I close the file. If I go to the Edit menu, Undo is disabled. But with VM Maestro, there's no need to panic. We can still get back to the previous version of the file. In the Projects view, right-click on the file and select Team, Show Local History, and VM Maestro will open the History view. Every line of the History view represents a separate copy of the file from your most recent saves. If you want to replace the current version of the file with a previous version, right-click on the second line and select Get Contents. Click Yes at the confirmation dialog, and you'll see we've replaced the file with the previous version before we deleted the two nodes. Now we're going to look at a different topology. What you're seeing here is a sped up video of all the changes that I made to this topology while following the Intro to BGP automated configuration video. You can find that video at the Cisco VIRL YouTube channel. For the purposes of the local history discussion, the point is simply that while making these sorts of iterative changes to a topology, you'll often make multiple edits to the topology itself, to the properties on the nodes, and to the configurations, either by hand or by running AutoNetKit multiple times. If you're like me, you'll save the topology multiple times while you work. And as we said earlier, every time you click Save, VM Maestro saves a copy of the file in its local history cache. VM Maestro manages the local history cache automatically, eventually discarding the oldest copies of the file. But it can safely keep dozens of copies of each file. Again, to see the local history for a file, right-click on the file in the Projects view and select Team, Show Local History. The last thing I did with this file was to run AutoNetKit, but I did not select the option to view the differences. I can do that now from the History view by right-clicking on the previous version of the file and selecting Compare Current with Local. That opens a difference viewer with the local version of the file on the left and the version from History on the right. I can click the Next Difference button to scroll to the next chunk of differences. You can see here that we changed from an EIGRP to an OSPF configuration. If I press the Next Change button instead of the Next Difference button, which is the second button from the right, VM Maestro will scroll through the changes within each difference region. In addition to comparing a version of the file from the local history to the current version of the file, I can compare two versions of the file in the local history with each other. Just select the two versions of the file, right-click, and select Compare with each other. In this case, you can see that the only change in the file was to change the topology's IGP setting from EIGRP to OSPF, just before I ran AutoNetKit for the last time. Now let's say I'd like to go all the way back to the version of the file before I started making these changes. Since I've made so many changes recently, I'd like to preview the version I select before I replace the current version with it. I'd like to say open with the topology editor, but that feature is not yet implemented in VM Maestro. So as a workaround for now, right-click on the file and select Open with Text Editor. Once that version of the file is open in the text editor, click File, Save As, and then select the topology name. Make sure that there's no trailing spaces after the .virl, and change the name to something temporary, like temp.virl. Now I can close this copy of the file, go to the Projects view, and open temp.virl in Topology Editor. Once I verify that this is the version of the file that I want, I can close temp.virl and go back to the routing protocols.virl file and go to its local history and select that version of the file again. Right-click on that version and select Get Contents to replace the current version of routing protocols.virl with the version from local history. Click Yes on the confirmation dialog. And now we've basically reverted routing protocols.virl back to the version of the file before we started making all the changes. Finally, I'd like to show the behavior of the history view when you have multiple files open. By default, the history view shows the history of the currently active editor, and that file is shown at the top of the history view. If you don't like this behavior, you can disable the Link with Editor button in the history view. Then the history view will continue showing the same file's history no matter which file is active. If you'd like to switch the history view to show a different file's contents, you can go to the Projects view, right-click on that file, and select Team, Show Local History. The history view will now show that file's history, no matter which file you select, until you again run Show Local History, or again enable the Link with Editor button. Just to reiterate, the local history view is useful to recover an older version of a file in cases where the undo action is not available. It can also be used to compare older versions of a file either with the current version or with each other.